Welcome to MilSpouse Matters, the podcast dedicated to encouraging military spouses. I'm Jen McDonald, and I was a military spouse for nearly 30 years until my husband's retirement. I'm also now the mom of an active duty son, a longtime writer for the military spouse world, and the author of the book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse. I created this podcast to bring you inspiration as you navigate your own military life, which can be amazing while also challenging. Whether you're dealing with a move, deployment, raising military kids, keeping your military marriage strong, or employment issues, we're going to talk about it. Military spouses, we're only stronger together. My goal is to bring you realistic hope and support for your own MilSpouse journey. Well, hello. This is Jen, and I am so glad to be back with you after quite a long break. It's been so fun to connect with a lot of you over social media this past summer, and I really enjoy hearing from you. So welcome, whether it's your first time listening to the podcast or if you're a longtime listener. I am really thankful that you're here, and I hope that something I share will be useful or encouraging to you, and I hope you're doing absolutely fabulous wherever in the world this finds you. So just a reminder, if you want to access the complete show archives, just go to jen-mcdonald.com or milspousematters.com. They go to the same place. Click the podcast tab and you can find all the past episodes and find show notes and resources along with all the buttons to subscribe wherever you're listening. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all the podcast aggregators. You should be able to find the MilSpouse Matters podcast there, or just right on my site. If I could ask you to subscribe and share the show, that is one of the most helpful ways to help bring the podcast to other people who might also be interested in it. So let's catch up just a little bit. So I don't know about you, but I feel like the summer of 2021 has just kind of flown past. Here it is, August. By the time you're listening to this, it's probably the end of August. Kids are going back to school in whatever way that looks this year. I have heard from some friends that their kids were going to go back in person and now they're not, or there's going to be all these requirements. My own little granddaughter will be going to all-day preschool. It's just so hard for me to believe she's turning 5, and I think they have to mask up the whole day, but I feel like little kids are pretty resilient and they might be a little bit better with it than us older folks. Last year, I had several episodes about going back to school. I have a lot of content about that. So if you are looking for some support or some ideas, I will link to those old episodes. They're not that old. They're from last year. And I don't know that that much has changed. So I think one of them is called Going Back to School During COVID. So whether you're homeschooling or you're doing virtual school, whatever's happening with your family, if you don't have kids or you don't have little kids anymore like I don't, a lot of times I feel like the fall can just be a time of resetting. I know some people do spring cleaning. I don't know what it is. I think because we homeschooled for 2 decades, I always kind of view fall as a time to kind of regroup and clean up a little bit and sort through closets and all that stuff. So I've been doing a little bit of that. I've also been working on a lot of things behind the scenes this summer, writing, and I will make some announcements about the next book soon. I think I mentioned last time I will be looking for some advanced copy reviewers. If that's something you're interested in doing, watch out for that or send me a message and I will just put you on a list. So basically what you would do is you would get an advanced reader copy and get it before anybody else and help me with launching, like leaving a review or helping promote it on social media. And I would love to have you be part of that, especially if you read my first book and kind of know what my style is like. That would be really, really helpful. I'm also in the middle of, because everything happens at once, right? Some rebranding and redoing my site. And I am so excited to share that with you. So that is underway. In fact, my site will be down from September 6th through the 9th. So if you're listening to this around that time frame, it'll just be saying something like coming soon, but it will be just down for a couple days and then back up. Super exciting and fun. And I'm also starting to share some of the stories from my upcoming book. Right now, I'm just calling it MilSpouse Stories. I don't know that that's what it's going to be called, but I'm sharing some of those on the blog from the older widows and couples And then also some younger spouses, sort of like, I keep calling it the Julie and Julia of military spouse life, because I think it's really fun, like spouses from the 50s and 60s and kind of what they have in common with us nowadays, what's different and what's the same, and what is really kind of binding us across the generations. So upcoming topics for this fall, we will be having some episodes about military marriage. That is a question I get a lot about how to strengthen your marriage if you've just moved or if your spouse is away or deployed a lot and you're trying to keep that connection. We're going to be having some book authors talking about their new books for military spouses or military kids. I also have a guest coming on to provide some support for stay-at-home moms. We've talked a lot about keeping a career going and volunteering and things like that, and I don't think I've ever done an episode to just really support at-home moms. So I'm really excited to share that one with you, because I think that can be an area, especially if you've just moved and you don't really feel like you can find a connection. How do you do that? How do you feel like what you're doing is validated as a stay-at-home mom? I loved staying home with my kids. It was some of the best years of my life. So I just really would encourage you to look at it as a joyful time, and whether you're there by choice or you are having to do that because of a move, and like maybe you're in a location where you just can't find a job. So lots of fun stuff coming up. And also I will be having some spouses that are submarine spouses, as well as Coast Guard and Reserve and Guard. So trying to make sure we hit it all. And if you know of anybody that would be a good resource for that, let me know and I will add them to my list. So if you go to my site, there's a spot to apply to be a guest, and that is the best way to get in touch with me. And I'm just going to be honest, we get a lot of people submitting their company or themselves to be a guest. So if you don't hear from me, it's either that it's just not a good fit right now, or we will reach back out to you later. So go ahead and submit it there, and we will do our best to get you in the queue. So today I thought it would be fun to do a listener Q&A. I've done this previously on episodes 25 and 45, and basically it's answering some questions from messages that I get on my Instagram, especially Facebook, from my email list, and even my Facebook group. So Instagram @MilSpouseMatters, I get a lot of questions there. And then I have a Christian Military Spouses Facebook group. And then, of course, my monthly email newsletter that I try to do every month, and it doesn't always happen, but usually it's just a roundup of resources or things that I think might be helpful for you, a recap of past episodes. It's never anything spammy. I don't have time to send you an email every week. So if you would like to keep up with some of that, again, go to my site and you can see how to sign up for my newsletter, and I will put the link. So here is the first question, and I apologize. I tried to put down all the names and I missed a couple, so I am sorry I don't remember who asked this. So first question is, what are your thoughts on planning weddings in the military, or just trying to plan anything as a mil spouse with this unpredictable lifestyle, or is it not really as unpredictable as it seems? I feel like that is a kind of a broad question, just because how do you plan anything? Well, it is unpredictable, and you need to be flexible because things can change at the very last moment where you have things set in stone. Don't ever do that. Pencil it in and just be adaptable. As far as planning a wedding in the military, I guess my husband was in the military. It's a long time ago, 33 years ago. However, Stacy Taylor in episode 27 talked about her Marine Corps son's wedding that was pushed up all of a sudden because of training dates. And in fact, he got married long distance, and you may have seen it. It was pretty viral, where a lot of spouses from the Fort Hood area came in and basically found a photographer, got flowers, put it all together so they could get married quickly because of a natural disaster coupled with training dates moving around, and they had to get married really suddenly, or it was going to be months and months until they got married. So I would say go listen to episode 27 to hear Stacy's story. I am sorry, I don't really have a lot of wedding advice. I think it's just be flexible, expect the best, prepare for the worst. And I think that is probably a good piece of advice for anything in military life. You just kind of have to be adaptable. And for somebody like me, that is a little hard. I kind of like to know what's coming, and I had to give that up a very long time ago. So question 2 is from Ashley, and she says, how and when should you apply for military base housing? So every base and post is different. And of course, even the process overseas is different. So check in with the housing office where you're headed, because typically you can get on the waiting list before you ever move once you have orders. And I highly recommend doing that right away, because even if you get there and decide you're not going to live in housing, it's better to be on the list and turn it down versus get there and think, oh, we're going to live on the economy and then can't find anything. And now you're on a 6-month or year-long waiting list. I thought for this episode, there's several questions that I reached out to some experts, and I want to share some of their thoughts with you that could answer things better than I ever could. So from Military Bay Owner, and I work for them as their content editor, so I knew exactly where to find this. It's called Living in Military Housing, What You Need to Know. I'm just going to read you part of it, and I'll link to the rest of this really great, fabulous article. And it says, each private housing company has its own specific process for applying to live on base. It's best to start researching online with the base location and housing provider to begin understanding their procedures. For example, Fort Meade, Maryland is operated by, you know what? I don't know how to say this, Corvias, because I never used them. While the housing at the Air Force Academy in Colorado is operated by Hunt Military Communities. Starting the application process as early as possible shortens the amount of days sitting on the wait list, but hard copies of PCS orders are not always processed in a timely manner. Work with your incoming housing office to determine if they have options like a provisional wait list or temporary lodging before the PCS orders are received. See, that's smart. I wouldn't have thought of that. In general, military families should expect a standard application submission either online or in person with supporting documents to ensure accurate eligibility according to family size and rank. You will need copy of your PCS orders, copy of the most recent and updated DEERS enrollment form, DD 1172-2. Of course, this is all regarding American military families, by the way, because I know I have some listeners from Canada and the UK and Australia. So this applies to U.S. military families. Should have said that first. Branch-specific confirmation of clearing, outgoing duty station, examples DA 31, leave form, AF form 227, a copy of your most current LES, that's your leave and earning statement, and I need to be careful about these acronyms, your valid special power of attorney if your spouse is absent, a valid photo ID, your other branch-specific forms such as a sex offender disclosure and acknowledgement like AF form 4422. Don't ignore the housing company's frequently asked questions links. There you'll find detailed information regarding wait lists, pet policies, upgrading a home after a promotion, the process of adding family members to the lease, and many more topics. So I hope that helps. And again, I will link to this really great article. There's so much more there about living on base, like some tips for that, some of the pet and dog breed restrictions, thinking about the pros and cons, school options, whether it will save you money or not to live on base, and a little bit of the history of base housing. The next question is from Ariana, and she says, I'm a fairly new MILSO, and sometimes the areas of Opsec and security measures seem to be approached differently by a lot of military spouse influencers. I guess I'm just wondering what good practices would be or your tips. Also, any suggestions for a wife who really can't talk to her husband about work because he's intel. Thank you, Jen. Love all your valuable content. Thank you so much, Ariana. I appreciate you reaching out. And this is tricky. My husband, his job for a long time, I didn't really know. I kind of generically knew what he did, but a lot of details I just did not know, and I did not ask. So I think we might need to do an entire episode on this. And you're right. You will see different people post different things, and just because they're doing it that way doesn't make it the correct way. So do be careful. You're smart. You've obviously figured out that probably what you're seeing is not what you're being told, like by your spouse's chain of command of what you should and should not be sharing. So some of the big ones would be you don't talk about dates, you don't talk about troop movement, you don't talk about specific units. And I have always had an issue with those deployment countdowns. And even if you're just sharing it privately, you don't know who's seeing it, who they're sharing with. I never did that. And I would just highly discourage anybody, if you have some sort of really specific deployment or, homecoming countdown, take it off of your social media. You can put it after. You can put it after the fact, like, yay, they're home. And that's kind of what I did. So now for me, I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. I never posted photos of my kids, and I didn't use their names. I didn't really post uniforms with their name on it. I also a lot of this came about well after we'd been in the military, so I didn't really have this issue until much later in my husband's career. The other thing, though, that I was talking to somebody about was as a writer, I was using my name, and I know some military spouse writers that do not use their real names, and I don't blame them. Back in, I would have to think back, probably around 2009, 2010, there was a whole big thing where some pretty high-profile military writers were being trolled online, is the nicest way to say it. And I had a little taste of that where some, what should I call it, extremist groups had found my website. They were leaving some super ugly comments, and I would just delete it. And if I had felt like something was dangerous, I would have reported it. But it was never anything beyond just kind of ugly. So that was one reason, just realizing that they could find out who I was and who my kids were and who my husband was. So again, I am going to direct you to a really good source, and I thought I'd read a little bit to you from this. It's from Army Mom Strong, and it's on Sandbox. I will link to it, and it's from last year, and I thought this was pretty timely. And it says, "What is Opsec do's and don'ts for military families?" And she says, okay, I think she is a military wife and a military mom. And she said, "After a year-long deployment to Afghanistan, I learned that my son was coming home. Being an excited military mom, I wanted to shout it from the rooftops, and I did. With the help of social media, I posted my daily countdown days, photos, and his destination in a flurry of excitement. Although these were seemingly innocuous Facebook posts, or so I thought, my posts violated the military operational security, or what we call Opsec. So have you heard the old saying, loose lips sink ships? Appearing on propaganda posters during World War II, the phrase means beware of unguarded talk. This saying informed servicemen and civilians to avoid conversations that could potentially compromise the war effort. It's still true today. In addition to in-person conversations, today's unguarded talk is also found in social media posts. Why does OPSEC matter for military families? I'm just going to share a couple of things, what she wrote, and I'll send you to the site so you can read the rest of it. So as part of a military family, we must practice OPSEC daily. I used to think that private information applied to only larger military missions or operations. That way of thinking changed when I learned that adversaries are skilled at finding bits of information and connecting them like dots to get a bigger picture of military plans. And that's why it's important, because we don't want to help the enemy or whoever, is not our friend to know exactly what's happening with our military. Adversaries can find these bits of information through military family and friends who innocently share information on social media sites. I'm just going to hit these high points. OPSEC for families, what to do and not to do. Don't post specific deployment dates. That deployment date on your mind might tempt you to share it on social media. Your post might include something like this. My son is deploying to Iraq from Fort Hood on October 11th. Keep specific dates to yourself when your child or spouse is deploying to a location or returning home. In fact, if people post these dates online, that can lead to deployment dates being changed. Don't be that person. You can share that they're deploying in a few weeks without referencing a specific date. I'd actually say I don't even do that. The next point says, do not post troop and unit information. Although you're bursting with pride about your military loved one's unit or troop, posting it on social media is a no-no. I think that's important. Do not post information about troop movements. If you learn that your deployed warrior's military unit is going on a mission, you may be wanting to ask for prayer or positive thoughts. In a post like, please pray for my son's military unit as they go on a mission outside their forward operating base in Afghanistan. They're a small group of 12, and I'm so worried about them. Never share this type of information on social media. And I would even say in the private Facebook groups, don't even share it there because you don't know who's in there. So I have a Facebook group, but there's almost 800 people in there. So we do our best to screen them, but you just never know. So don't ever share specific dates. What you can do, if you need support, positive thoughts, or prayer, share that privately with friends or family. Do not use countdown clocks. Countdown clocks are popular on social media to count down the days or hours to an event. For military families, that event may be that your loved one is coming home from deployment in 6 weeks, 3 days, and 4 hours. If you share that on social media, you're going to have a long list of comments from well-meaning folks. This will simply bring even more attention to your countdown clock and the reason behind it. So just don't do that. And don't post photos that show your military loved one's name and location. So you can do something where you blur it out or just don't post them in uniform. This is an important point. She said, I have to admit, I loved sharing photos of my son in uniform. I didn't think about the fact that the photos revealed his name and rank. If he sent me a photo from his location, it may have revealed location information based on what was in the background. The photos likely had metadata embedded in them too. Metadata stores GPS coordinates and embeds them in photo files. You can view the photo file's properties to view it. Anyone can, and that is the point here. Posting photos like this reveals too much information. Also, have you seen photos of military service members made into memes on social media without their permission? It happens. Turn off location services and social networks. Disable GPS on your phone when taking photos. Share photos of your military loved one in civilian clothes. And that's what I did for years and years and years. This is Jen again. So sorry, I'm going back and forth between this article and what I'm saying, but I didn't post any photos of my husband in uniform for a long time. Probably towards the end of his career. And then by then he was kind of like a senior leader and they were putting him all over social media anyway. So I wasn't doing anything they weren't doing. And then also after he retired. But even then, I kind of just don't. If you share photos of your hero in uniform, block out all identifying information. You can blur it. You can black it out with like the little tool. You can also frame some awesome photos of your military child in uniform and put them around your home, your child, or your spouse, whoever's serving. So remember that information spreads like wildfire on social media. Don't let that information be yours. Again, that was from Army Mom Strong, and she is the mom of a pilot who is home safe from the war zone, and she is the co-author of The Heart of a Military Mom. So as someone who is both a spouse and I have a child serving in the military, I know it's hard to not post. So I would just say, if in doubt, leave it out. And the big takeaway is identifying information, dates, movements, just don't post that. Okay, on to the next question. Colleen says, could you give me some advice for making friends in big cities when you don't live on base and aren't established with a church yet? Sorry. We recently moved to Virginia and I have reached out to spouse pages and there are just so many people that comments get buried. I don't have children or pets yet, and people are looking for similarities. Our church hunt is in the works. And then another one from M. My partner is deployed overseas, and I'm in the DC area. I'm having trouble finding groups that aren't centered about living on base. And do you know of any? And I had two questions about Washington, DC. So I'm going to answer that one first, because DC is a different animal altogether. When we moved there, my husband had been in, 25 years. We were even living on base at Bowling Air Force Base. And I really was like, this is unlike any military city I've ever seen. And my husband kept telling me it's not a military city, it's DC. And even though there's so many military bases in the area, it is very different because it's so vast and spread out. And there's people there for all different reasons. It's not, quote, a military oriented city. So I would suggest starting with the nearest base to you, or whichever service branch your spouse is or partner is affiliated with. And usually the installation spouses groups will welcome reserve and guard spouses as well. So start there and just see if they've got something you could attend. And I've also heard this is a good group. It's called Capital Area Military Spouses. And I think that's all ranks, all armed forces, both active and retired, and they are pretty active. So I will link to them, Capital Area Military Spouses. They have events and sub-clubs, which means kind of special interest groups. And yeah, that might be a fun place for you to start if you're in the DC area. For other ideas for, outside of that area, sometimes it's better to look for friends based on an interest versus just the fact that they're a military spouse. In fact, when we lived in Hawaii, most of my really good friends I had met because of my kids' youth group. They were other parents, or they were because of sports. And even before we had kids, I would meet people. My husband would play intramural sports, and I would just go to those games and meet people that way. You can find people, through volunteering. And I have a lot of content about finding friends. In fact, one of the blog posts I mentioned, Mil-Spouse Stories, We Need Each Other. And I will link to all of these. And I'll quit saying that. But honestly, if I mention something, it will be linked in the show notes. All you have to do is just click on it in the podcast player and it'll take you right there. So, or just go to milspousematters.com and you can find the show notes for this episode. So I have another blog post called 8 Ways Military Spouses Can Connect Virtually. Another one called The Challenge of Making New Friends as a Military Spouse, and several episodes about this topic. When you feel alone, how to make friends as a military spouse friendships, And I share a lot of ideas there about how to find other people that you can be friends with, because that is one of the roughest parts of moving. There's not any easy fixes for sure. So check your installations paper, check their social media. I don't know if this is still a thing, but even at a coffee shop or a library, I mean, this has been within the past few years. They will sometimes have a bulletin board and you can just find things there. Also, most bases offer briefings for new families. Now, I know right now a lot of that's been put on hold in person, but that has been one way I've met people, was the newcomers orientation, volunteering I mentioned. A couple other ways I wanted to mention was there's a group called Military Wild. If you like to get outside, they have chapters all around the world. I actually interviewed one of their founders on episode 50. And yeah, check them out. It's called Military Wild. And it's like hiking and just doing things near your base to get outdoors and find connections. And I've also heard from other spouses who have found friendships through meetup local groups. So try one of those, and I would love to hear how it went for you. Next question. Courtney says, "Hi, I came across your podcast just now searching for help during deployment. We currently started a new deployment. It's been 6 years since the last one, and this one is tough. And I'm praying my marriage can survive and get strong after this. Do you have any tips on what I can do?" I have several episodes about deployment, and I'll tell you where to find those in just a minute. I also have a free 5-day deployment devotional and my book if you want to check those out with some ideas about strengthening your military marriage and getting through deployment. One of my favorite past episodes I had with Lizanne Lightfoot, who has been through, I believe, 7 combat deployments, and that was episode 19. She has a very active Facebook group for deployed spouses, and so you might find some ideas there. One thing my husband and I did was read a book together long distance, and we sent emails back and forth regarding what we thought about it to stay connected, because we didn't have a lot of phone time. And I had heard from another spouse recently too that like the phone time has just been such a disappointment because the kids are kind of all clamoring to talk to the spouse, or the connection's terrible, or they're tired because it's the end of the day for them and it's the beginning of the day for you, or vice versa. And you're trying to, fit in all this talk and have these expectations. Phone conversations, well, they're deployed. Just have zero expectations. And if anything good happens, then great. But if not, you're not disappointed. So we found email to be the easiest way, because I could send an email, when I had a moment, and he could read it when he had a moment and answer. And it was like there was no pressure. So maybe pick a book of the Bible, or you could pick an actual book, like a marriage book or something you're both interested in, and kind of do your own little book club while you're apart. That's a good way to stay connected. I have episode 21 is about military marriage. Episode 32, deployment resources for your military family. Episode 34 was about deployment and reintegration when they come back home. But I also wanted to mention, having some grace for yourself. Obviously, keeping your marriage strong is so important. But I'll share this with you. It's a year, I call it the year I watched the Gilmore Girls, and it sounds so frivolous and silly. But we were living in Europe. My husband deployed for a year, and we stayed put. And so, how you do the thing where you're like, I'm going to run a marathon and, organize my life, and you're going to have all these great goals of going to really invest in yourself and take care of yourself and take college classes and and all those things that you're going to thrive. And sometimes just keeping it together is what you end up doing. And so I had all these goals. So this is back in the days of DVDs, and we had this little shop on base. We were at Ramstein Air Base, and I can't remember what it was called. And so I saw the Gilmore Girls, and I'd never heard of it. And I thought, oh, well, I have issues with insomnia when my husband was deployed. And so I would watch an episode after I put the kids to bed. Kind of got hooked. And I realized there was 153 episodes. And I thought, well, this is something I can do. I can finish this whole series. And that became this kind of really strange goal. Not real productive, but it gave me permission to sit down and do nothing and just escape a little bit into something that was really fun. And the funny part of it was my oldest son was in high school, and he had to pass right by this shop. And so he would go there on to baseball practice. And so he started taking my DVDs that I was done with and picking up the next one. And so he came home one day and he goes, "Mom, I cannot do this for you anymore." And I said, "Why?" He goes, "They're calling me the Gilmore guy." They're like, "Oh, there's the Gilmore guy." And I was like, that is the sweetest thing. So I think many of us have a hard time not doing something that's, quote, productive. And we feel like we always have to be doing something. And we're task oriented because we're military spouses, we're your team moms, and we're like your emergency contact. And we're doing all those things and holding down the fort. I'm going to give you permission to just sit down and do something that is fun and that builds you in some way, whether it is watching a show like the Gilmore Girls or just taking a break. I just want to give you that permission. I don't know if that pertains to you at all. Maybe it pertains to somebody, but I know deployment is tough and we can want to make it like this super productive, very meaningful time. And sometimes it's just something to be gotten through. So we just have a couple more questions. And a listener says, I would love to hear more about homeschooling military kids and tweens and how to get military kids connected quickly to a military community after PCS. In episode 51, Homeschooling a Military Life, I talked quite a lot about homeschooling, so I don't want to go too much into it. I do have some blog posts. One is called Homeschooling Around the World, and one is Homeschooling and Military Life, a Natural Fit. I will share one with you called Homeschooling Around the World Military Style. And really, I wrote this in 2014. It's been updated since then. And I shared kind of my typical day. We did a lot of literature-based studies where we could do things together. And then the older, everybody did their own math. Everybody did their own language arts. But we did a lot of reading, literature, science, and history together. And honestly, if you're a military homeschooler, you have to learn to adapt. If you're going to homeschool for the long haul, you have to learn to relax or you just won't make it. It seemed like whenever we got into a good routine, my husband was either sent on a long deployment or we were moving across the world or some big change was happening. And so we did learn to kind of flex. Homeschooling was our routine, but we had to learn to be adaptable. And we've lived in a lot of different places and learned to comply with all sorts of state homeschooling requirements, from very strict to very lax. So keep on top of that. What is the legal part of your homeschooling? We did co-ops. We did once-a-week charter schools. We did dual enrollment. We did sports through the local high school. And every place we moved, we took a look to see what was available and what was best for our kids. One of our things that we always said was we didn't homeschool to close doors for our children, but to open them. And that was just a motto we had. So we would kind of land somewhere and see what's available and then go from there. So check out all the content I have on that about that. And I really hope it helps you. This is from Rhea Ray. And she says, hi, I just found your podcast and I started listening to it from episode 1. My fiance and I are both still in college, but he's doing Air Force ROTC and is working towards being a fighter pilot. I have no experience or background with military life, and I just started looking for blogs or podcasts that could help me prepare. What resources would you recommend? Thanks for listening, and I'm really thankful that you reached out. I was in the same boat. I had zero experience with military life. So I hope that my blog and my site and this podcast can be of help to you. The really cool thing about my new site is I hope that it will be better organized. So if you're a new spouse, you know where to go. If you're looking for support on a specific topic, that you can just find that very easily. So in September 2021, that should be all good to go. Right now, you can still go there and search. You should be able to find some support for your new military life, and best of luck to you. So I think that's it for today. Thank you for hanging in there with me. That was kind of a lot of questions and a lot of explanations. And I hope that wherever in the world you are, that you are doing great. And I will talk to you next time. Bye. Thanks for listening to the MilSpouse Matters podcast. Connect with me at milspousematters.com or on social media as @milspousematters. You can find my book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse, on Amazon and other booksellers. Love the show? Please leave a 5-star review in whatever podcast player you're listening, and then share it with someone else who could use it too. Until next time, have a great week.